looking at the world. There is another way of looking at the world. Well, I'm so glad you've come to join me in studying A Course in Miracles here on Groundhog Day, February the 2nd of 2025. Lesson 33 in A Course in Miracles. We're reading from the Foundation for Inner Peace version of A Course in Miracles this year. And I'm Forgiveness Willie, teaching forgiveness from the Ozarks. Let's take a look at Lesson 33. There is another way of looking at the world. Today's idea is an attempt to recognize that you can shift your perception of the world in both its outer and inner aspects. A full 5 minutes should be devoted in the morning and evening applications. In these practice periods, the idea should be repeated as often as you find comfortable, though unhurried applications are essential. Alternate between surveying your outer and inner perceptions, but without an abrupt sense of shifting. Merely glance casually around the world you perceive as outside yourself, then close your eyes and survey your inner thoughts with equal casualness. Try to remain equally uninvolved in both, and to maintain this detachment as you repeat the idea throughout the day. The shorter exercise periods should be as frequent as possible. Specific applications of today's idea should also be made immediately when any situation arises which tempts you to become disturbed. For these applications say, there is another way of looking at this. Remember to apply today's idea the instant you are aware of distress. It may be necessary to take a minute or so to sit quietly and repeat the idea to yourself several times. Closing your eyes will probably help in this form of application. So throughout the day, we're going to try to keep our morning and evening review alive, which we're going to spend 5 minutes at that, looking at around the outside world and then closing our eyes and with kind of a casual observation of our thoughts and of the world we see around us, we simply tell ourselves there is another way of looking at the world. And then throughout the day, keep that idea alive as often as you can throughout the day. He doesn't tell you how often, but just throughout the day, tell yourself there's another way of looking at the world. And if anything distresses you, disturbs you, kind of wants to take your peace away, that temptation should be met with a quick statement that there is another way of looking at this. Okay, so you kind of get an idea. We'll try to do a 5-minute practice at the end of before we close. We'll do one of our practice periods together. Okay, let's go take a look in our text reading. And we're ready in Chapter 4, The Illusions of the Ego, the last section of Chapter 4, Roman numeral 7, Creation and Communication. It is clear that while the content of any particular ego illusion does not matter, its correction is more helpful in a specific context. Ego illusions are quite specific, although the mind is naturally abstract. Part of the mind becomes concrete, however, when it splits. The concrete part believes in the ego, because the ego depends on the concrete. The ego is the part of the mind that believes your existence is defined by separation. Paragraph 2. Everything the ego perceives is a separate whole, without the relationships that imply being. Relationships that imply being. We find God in our relationships. Remember, he said yesterday, that salvation is a collaborative venture? We work on this together. You see God in your brothers and sisters. You remember he said the only gift he really wants from us is gratitude to our brothers. The ego is thus against communication. Let's back up. Everything the ego perceives as a separate whole without the relationships that imply being. The ego is thus against communication, except insofar as it is utilized to establish separateness rather than to abolish separateness. The communication system of the ego is based on its own thought system, as is everything else it dictates. Its communication is controlled by its need to protect itself, and it will disrupt communication when it experiences threat. This disruption is a reaction to a specific person or persons. The specificity of the ego's thinking, then, results in spurious generalization, which is really not abstract at all. It merely responds in certain specific ways to everything it perceives as related. Paragraph 3. In contrast, spirit reacts in the same way to everything it knows is true and does not respond at all to anything else. Nor does it make any attempt to establish what is true. It knows that what is true is everything that God created. Okay, so the spirit knows that everything that God created is what's true. It knows that what is true is everything that God created. It is in complete and direct communication with every aspect of creation, because it is in complete and direct communication with its Creator. This communication is the will of God. Creation and communication are synonymous. Creation and communication are synonymous. Okay, so that's an idea you want to keep in mind. Creation and communication are synonymous, synonyms. God created every mind by communicating His mind to it, thus establishing it forever as a channel for the reception of His mind and will. Since only beings of a like order can truly communicate, His creations naturally communicate with Him and like Him. This communication is perfectly abstract, since its quality is universal in application and not subject to any judgment, any exception, or any alteration. God created you by this and for this. The mind can distort its function, but it cannot endow itself with functions it was not given. That is why the mind cannot totally lose the ability to communicate, even though it may refuse to utilize it on behalf of being. Paragraph 4. Existence as well as being rests on communication. Existence as well as being rests on communication. Existence, however, is specific in how, what, and with whom communication is judged to be worth undertaking. Being is completely without these distinctions. So being communicates without the distinctions of what and with whom communication is judged to be worth undertaking. How, what, and with whom. Being is completely without these distinctions. It is a state in which the mind is in communication with everything that is real. Being is completely without these distinctions. Being is a state in which the mind is in communication with everything that is real. To whatever extent you permit this state to be curtailed, you're limiting your sense of your own reality, which becomes total only by recognizing all reality in the glorious context of its real relationship to you. This is your reality. Do not desecrate it or recoil from it. It is your real home, your real temple, and your real self. Paragraph 5. God, who encompasses all being, created beings who have everything individually, but who want to share it to increase their joy. Nothing real can be increased except by sharing. Nothing real can be increased except by sharing. That is why God created you. That's why God created you. Nothing real can be increased. Nothing real can be increased except by sharing. That is why God created you. Divine abstraction, capital abstraction, divine abstraction, God. Divine abstraction takes joy in sharing. That is what creation means. How, what, and to whom are irrelevant, because real creation gives everything, since it can create only like itself. Remember that in the kingdom there is no difference between having and being, as there is in existence. In the state of being, the mind gives everything always. Paragraph 6, the Bible repeatedly states that you should praise God. Now, where's it? It says that all the way through it. Just a few, the Psalms are loaded with them. Psalm 100, Psalm 148, and Psalm 150 are three that you might check out. But the Bible's loaded with this idea that you should praise God. But look, he's going to kind of explain what that means. This hardly means that you should tell him how wonderful he is. He has no ego with which to accept such praise, and no perception with which to judge it. But unless you take your part in the creation, his joy is not complete because yours is incomplete. Wow, God's joy is not complete if yours is incomplete because you're part of God. And this he does know. When your joy is incomplete and thus his is incomplete, this he does know. He knows it in his own being and its experience of his son's experience. Let's read that again. His joy is not complete because yours is incomplete. And this he does know. He knows it in his own being and its experience of his son's experience. The constant going out of his love is blocked when his channels are closed. And he is lonely when the minds he created do not communicate fully with him. How do you communicate fully with God? By communicating to all that God created, which is what God, it's the communication, is the beingness. Paragraph 7. God has kept your kingdom for you, but he cannot share his joy with you until you know it with your whole mind. Revelation is not enough, because it is only communication from God. So revelation is communication from God. God does not need revelation returned to him, which would clearly be impossible, but he does want it brought to others. This cannot be done with the actual revelation. Its content cannot be expressed, because it is intensely personal to the mind that receives it. It can, however, be returned by that mind to other minds through the attitudes the knowledge from the revelation brings. Wow, the attitudes. There's what you can communicate. The feeling of goodness, of God, of love. And the last paragraph, 8. God is praised whenever any mind learns to be wholly helpful. There you go. God is praised whenever any mind learns how to be wholly helpful. This is impossible without being wholly harmless, because the two beliefs must coexist. Helpfulness and harmlessness go together. The truly helpful are invulnerable because they are not protecting their egos, and so nothing can hurt them. Isn't that nice to know? The truly helpful are invulnerable because they're not protecting their egos, and so nothing can hurt them. Their helpfulness is their praise of God, and He will return their praise of Him because they are like Him and they can rejoice together. God goes out to them and through them, and there is great joy throughout the kingdom. Every mind that is changed adds to this joy with its individual willingness to share in it. The truly helpful are God's miracle workers, whom I direct until we are all united in the joy of the kingdom. Be a miracle worker following the direction of the atonement of God, of the voice of this book, Jesus, until you feel completely filled with the joy of the kingdom. The truly helpful are God's miracle workers, whom I direct until we are all united in the joy of the kingdom. I will direct you to wherever you can be truly helpful, and to whoever can follow my guidance through you. Wow. So just step back and let Him lead the way. He'll take you to the right place at the right time, where those who can use your miracle working capabilities can receive from you the attitudes that the revelation that God's given you can now come through you to them. Okay, let's see. Let's take a look at what's going on around the world today. And of course, all day today, keep in your mind often, there's another way of looking at the world. And then kind of look around. Or close your eyes and look around what's going on inside. Okay, like I said, it's Groundhog Day. And you know, that's for any young folks that are listening, that's kind of a fairy tale. There's no real, you know, they say that if it's an overcast day and you can't see a shadow, then spring is almost here. If you can see a shadow, then there's 6 more weeks of winter. An old, probably German idea, but it was just a fun fable. Okay, so of course, I'm 3 days before Groundhog Day. God do my, and if it was going by today, pretty overcast today. But you know, it's in what is that? Punxsutawney Phil. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. The groundhog. They're in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. I think he's 130-some years old, according to the story, the fable. Since this is a lesson on truth, I don't like to mix anything. If anybody thinks that, I want everybody to know what's true. Okay. Okay, let's see what else is going on. You know, I found out that the presentation of Jesus in the temple, that the Greek Orthodox and Anglican and a lot of Christian groups actually celebrate on the 2nd instead of the 1st. So I'm not exactly sure if it was yesterday or today. Also called, had a few other names, Hypopont, and it is another. That's the Greek word, mean meeting actually. Let's see what else. That was in Luke 22. Or Luke 2, verse 22 through 40. You can read about it. I told you that yesterday. Also today, I found that it's also Embolic Day today. So I don't know if it was yesterday or today. The pagan and Wiccan holiday where they celebrate the between solstice and equinox. And they also honor the goddess Bridget, which is the goddess of fire and fertility. Maybe when you're building your fire, you think about Bridget today. If you have a little wood stove like I do, keep warm. Also Groundhog, and you know, it's also Groundhog Day, which is a groundhog is a woodchuck, which is a Marmota monax, and they're North American animals. Woodchuck, groundhog. It's also Hedgehog Day, which is, a hedgehog is the Erinaceus europoea, is the European groundhog. The African is a different genus, Atalerix. So there's, the old world hedgehogs there's not hedgehogs except people make pets out of them, and they're in North America now, but they weren't originally, okay? But I don't think they're wild. There may be some wild ones too, I don't know. Feral hedgehogs, I don't know. River Day and World Wetlands Day. And when I think about those, I think about the riparian way. The riparian way, spelled R-I-P, riparian, is the area, usually people consider 100 to 200 feet from the banks of a creek. And that area should be left undisturbed or should have lots of vegetation. If it doesn't have vegetation, plant it. Roots of trees. Not such a good idea to mow right up to a creek. There's probably a nice, occasionally, just for human beauty and get into the creek. But better to leave it predominantly with things like bamboo or willow or other things that grow along the wetland area right beside the creek. The riparian way. Protect it. Scout Sunday, for you scouts. Today's the day to revel in your scoutedness. Self-Renewal Day, Sled Dog Day. With sled dogs, I thought, wouldn't that be kind of fun if you had some sled dogs and you hooked them up to a bicycle? Just when you took a walk and get to a hill, you let them mush and pull you up the hill. Okay, let's see. And what else? Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo Day, which in 1848 on this day, Mexico ceded a large portion of the western United States, and Rio Grande became the border between the United States and Mexico. But California, Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, and Arizona all were ceded to the United States. Now let's take a look at our fig. Our next one we're looking at is the LSU Purple Fig. LSU Purple Fig is a very reliable, prolific producer of early to late delicious figs, one of the best figs to come along for some time. Excellent for containers, producing early figs as soon as growth starts. Very acclimated to the fluctuating weather of the South, does great in Virginia Beach, zone 7 to 9. Has fruited well at our nursery, zone 7. A customer from Hamilton Square, New Jersey, in zone 6 is fruiting LSU Purple successfully outside. More nematode resistant than most figs in Florida. Best to pick a few days after fruit turns black, wrinkles, and elongates. Space 10 to 12 foot circles. And it's the Ficus corica, the LSU Purple Fig. And our word for peace is from Navajo, and it's Hozho. Hozho. Hozho be with you. Now let's see if we've got 5 minutes, don't we? Let's see if, and let's just do a little. I'll say a few things that he reminded us to do in our meditation. There is another way of looking at the world. Now look around. There is another way of looking at the world. Then close your eyes and do the same. There is another way of looking at the world. Today's idea is an attempt to recognize that you can shift your perception of the world. Shift your perception of the world in both its inner and outer day's practice. Periods, the idea should be repeated as often as you find comfortable. Though unhurried applications are essential, There is another way of looking at the world. Alternate between surveying your outer and inner perceptions. But without an abrupt sense of shifting. Merely glance casually around the world you see as outside yourself. Then close your eyes and survey your inner thoughts with equal casualness. Try to remain equally uninvolved in both and to maintain this detachment as you repeat the idea throughout the day, throughout the day. There is another way of looking at the world. Hozho.